So our last speaker for today is Müller. Müller comes from a very different field. So he's not a computer scientist, but he's actually working in the social sciences. He's a researcher at TU Chemnitz, at the chair of media communication, and his work in the last years has been focusing on the understanding of the human cognition system in the context of e-learning. And Nicholas will now give us an outsider view of the psychological aspects of visualization from the perspective of a social scientist.
Yes, thank you for the short introduction. Coming back to Robert's model, yes, we essentially don't know exactly what's happening inside the perception. The human mind is a black box, and it is a dimension we will probably never really truly understand, since we can't open it up and reverse engineer it in a way that would allow us to exactly know what's happening. So most of the examples I brought you from inside my field is in a way that we know it works, and we know it has to be thought about when producing some user experiments, but we don't necessarily know exactly why this is happening. But we will come to that at a later point. The presentation consists of mainly 3 points. First, a short view on the relevant cognitive processes inside the human mind, followed by some examples for cognitive interpretation, and a short few words on experimental designs, followed by questions, if you have some. So, without further ado, let's go into the first one, the relevant cognitive processes. First off, if you show an image to a participant, then you have basically 2 stages of information perception. The first one is a pre-attentive one. This is a completely automatic process and basically has nothing more than just seeing the picture you hold in front of the person. The second step is a very much more analytical process. So in this point, you have the problem of different knowledge inside participants. Someone who is expecting to see something is going to see this. Basically, you see what you want, what you expect, or what you know you're going to see. So this is heavily dependent on context, which I'm going to on the next slide. These basic cognitive processes evolved over time. So this is one of the first steps where we know this is happening, but we don't exactly know in what part or where this came to existence. So, when you are going for image identification, there are basically 2 ways going on in the human mind. The first one is a bottom-up, the second one is a top-down process. Let's look at this from the perspective of looking at an image with some words, like a book. So at first you have a visual stimuli, something you just see. In the next step you have a background figure differentiation. This is where your mind is telling you, okay, this probably is a background. This can be a wall, this can be a landscape you are seeing in reality. But at some point you have to make a decision, what is the object in front of the background. What's that problem we are going to on the example pages. In the next step, you have an analysis of characteristics. So you're going to look, okay, there might be a shape looking like this and another shape looking like this. So probably you have a letter, and probably it's the letter T. And if you are able to identify these letters, you are able to identify words, and with the words you have meaning and context. Or you go in from another side and you have context, so you know you are going to be on a EuroRVVV conference and you are going to expect to see scientific presentations. So you have a very specific mindset when you're going into a room and listening to the presentations at hand. Yeah, the problem is there might be some problems on the two processes going up and down. This is a very much interactive way to identify information, but I'm getting ahead. So keep in mind, we either start from the context, depending on individual knowledge, or we are starting from purely seeing. And this is getting more clear when I get to the examples for cognitive interpretation. So first, the problem of what is the background, what is the foreground. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has seen one of these pictures. The problem is we don't really know what is happening inside the black box when people look at this. It's probably in a way that it's dependent on previous knowledge, whether you see the two faces first or you see the vase first. This is a purely decision, and this is exactly because your mind is deciding for one color being the background and one color being for the object, and you can switch in between at will. If this isn't possible, you have those two pictures in one picture, and I guess this is important on your field of scientific work as well, because when I'm looking at flow visualizations without the context of knowing much about flow visualizations, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to look at the brighter colors or at the darker ones. Then there's more to an image than meets the pure eye. If you're going from a purely bottom-up process, you are able to see, well, different shaped lines and circles with a dent at some point. But you are also able to see a third figure in this picture, namely a white triangle, which is only possible because you are able to infer information that is not really there. Probably it wasn't even intended to have this form, this shape in that picture, but it is there nonetheless, and it can lead to false results in a user study. If you're going for dents in circles and people identify triangles instead, this could be negative. So, interpretation priorities. What's happening first? Figure ground versus image segmentation. The problem is that I've said this is not a purely one-way street. You don't go either up the bottom-up or the top-down process. You have a cascaded process going on there, and you have partial results that are sent from the lower levels up to the higher ones and back down. This is because you have knowledge about what you see, and I'm going back to the context of what you expect to see. If you look at this picture, and the task for you is to read out loud the first line, and English is your first language, then this is a very difficult task for you, because your bottom-up process is telling you that there is a blue color, while your top-down process is telling you that the word you have to read out loud is red. If English is not your first language, then it's heavily dependent on how your English really is, if you have to partially translate it in your mind. Children, before they can read, have no problem whatsoever to identify the colors right. People, as soon as they can read, do. Just because there is an interaction error from the top-down and the bottom-up processes, fighting over who is to get prioritized. Then there are some Gestalt laws in the world where we are not quite sure on this from a psychological point of view when they emerge. Either we are already born with them, or we acquire it at such an early age that we can't test it yet. So no one would guess that on the picture A there are two lines. The line 2 and 3 belong together. You would guess that the first and the second, the third and the fourth belong together. That's the same process that tells you regarding similarity that there are different horizontal lines, not vertical ones, and that line A follows line B, and C goes to D, not to any other letter that's there. These are most probably fragments of evolutionary processes, because it's quite important if you're standing in front of a cave at point B and there's a saber-toothed tiger coming on point A to infer the right path it's going to take in order to save your life. It's the same as on the Gestalt law foreclosure, because you wouldn't guess that there's half a rabbit behind the other rabbit in the foreground. You can infer this information on your own. Going to the interpretation of symbols, you have this sign here. It is a irregularly shaped drawing, but if you put it in a sentence, you have different meaning for the same point. This is because you can take context and apply it to whatever you're going to see. So again, in user studies, it's very important to look at what information you give adjacent to the user task at hand. This is also why you are able to read this paragraph, because you don't have to have all the information laid out. Consequently, you are able to infer information that is hidden in there. And this is only possible because you do not look at all the individual letters, but you are looking at meaning inside the sentences. And you do have some knowledge about texts. You have knowledge about words. You know which words are following other words, and most probably will in the course of the paragraphs presented here. Okay. Then the question about colors. I'm getting quite often asked about the meaning of colors and how the human mind is interpreting different colors. The problem with colors is they are heavily dependent on cultural influences. So pretty much everyone in this room knows the example of white being a color of sadness in Asia, and if you go to a funeral over here, you wouldn't dress up in white. You would very well over there. So you don't have color as a universal influence. You have something like red, which is standing for blood in every culture on the planet, but other colors are culturally influenced as well. So I brought some examples of what colors are meaning, like white, which means mostly clean, snow, or seriosity. We have blue for nature, water, coolness, quietness, but only over here in, well, Europe, Western Hemisphere. We have green for poison, but also for nature. We have yellow, mostly for the sun, but also for poison and optimism. We have red for blood, war, passion, danger, and fire. And we have black for secrecy, tradition, power, and darkness. So we can infer this information, but whether or not you choose to take these pictures, these colors, into user experiments is a whole other question, because it might be that there are people, well, it might not be. There are some people who basically can't see colors, so they wouldn't work very effectively in a user study about the interpretation of important information. Okay, so keeping in mind, when going into user studies, presenting computed images for in user studies, then try to keep Gestalt laws in mind. If you have, we've talked about a flow with two, I don't know the word for strudel.
Vortex.
Vortex.
A vortex, thank you. If you have two vortexes in a flow visualization, you could think, because they are next to each other, that they belong together, that they have the same origin. But eventually, it could be this is wrong. This is just because the Gestalt laws is telling your end user that there might be a dependency where really there isn't. Mostly use them according to a desired message that you want to transport, but not in a very frequent way. Try to keep it low. Get the audience in way of what context do they expect, what do you tell them in regard of what this study is going to be about. And keep in mind that there are unintended data hidden in pictures that's going to be shown, like the third triangular object in the picture I've shown. All right. Jumping forward to experimental designs. Image gist identification is a very difficult task. Just because pictures are shown to a group of people, they don't necessarily see all the relevant information that is going to be presented. In one study, it was there were two pictures shown, one with a lady obviously ill in a cast, and it was interpreted in a way that the man in the background is holding the door open for her. And in the second picture, it was identified that the man is holding the door open for the other man to the left of the lady. So if this information is not transferred, then the whole study about the different information in those pictures is bogus, because without this pretest, it is not possible. The second one is about a couple obviously deeply in love, and the second one about a vampire shortly before he's going to have his dinner. But the fangs are not easy to spot on the second image. So this is according to detail, and I could think about, again, regarding flow visualization, that there might be some flows that's not very easy to spot, especially for me, missing the context. So, I've been asked to suggest some points to keep in mind for future research. Gestalt laws are key, since we are, as I've said, most probably are born with them. If a computer is going to visualize something according to Gestalt laws, it would be very helpful for any user looking at them if the computer would be able, most probably following some kind of fallback, to hint that there are two objects very close together, for example, but not necessarily because they belong together, just to prevent people from interpreting data that isn't really there. Pretests, they are key in psychology. Every experiment we do, I guess we do it too, has some kind of pretest where we first identify if we have two pictures and we are wanting to claim that the one shows data better than the other one, then we would have a pretest showing if they are real, if they can be compared at all. If one of them is just pure black and the other one shows a graph, it's obvious where more information is to be spotted. It's the one with the graph. And so I can't make an experiment where I'm going to tell that the graph is better than just a blank page. And in the end, I think coming from eye tracking research, I think it's always a good idea to have an eye tracker follow the paths, the view paths of test subjects in order to identify if the people are looking at the intended spots I've prepared in my pictures. there is quite a well-known example of two basketball teams passing a ball. One team is dressed in black, one team is dressed in white. They are passing a ball to each other within their own team, and the user task is to identify how often does the white team passes the ball to each other. Now, if you look at this movie with an eye tracker, every person who gets the correct number or is very close to the correct number of passes does not once look at the moonwalking gorilla costume going from one side of the screen to the other, just because they are so focused on identifying, on counting the ball, that they don't even have time to quickly look at this obviously not belonging character in this video. I tried to bring it, I wasn't able to get it out of the converter, so excuse me, but probably just Google after gorilla and moonwalking gorilla and you will be able to find the video, I'm sure. Alright, so far for my presentation. If there are any questions.
We will hand in the moonwalking gorilla on the whiteboard.
Okay, so are there any questions? Yep.
Yeah, so I guess the other question is, are questions or issues in visualization trivial? Are problems that we have in visualization, are they trivial or not?
They are not trivial. No, of course not. My decision to come here was because I have, in my opinion, we are looking at the same problem from two different angles. But basically we are zooming in on the true question. Also, we might never get into the black box, but this is just coming from two different directions. But we all want to wonder about how can we produce a visualization that actually helps interpreting data, and what's the human mind going to do with it? How can we prepare something in a way that the human mind has it more easy to interpret?
Okay, any questions? Okay.
You had the picture there with the two faces and the
figure ground determination.
Yeah. So, I mean, for this picture, it's obvious you can ask the people what do you see and so on, but most probably you will never get out what they really saw first. So is there like a technique which somehow can produce the output of what the users really saw first? Because I mean that would be also one thing very important for visualization, right? So what do the users spot at first glance, right?
You just show the picture very, very short. So this process, this figure ground determination, is not a process that takes a lot of time. This is done instantly. As soon as you look down and you look up and you look in front here, you most probably are going to see me as an object in front of this wall. And only if you start to stare, you might get to a point where I'm going to drift in the background. But if you show it very, very short, there is no time to have a different perspective, because the first time you saw these kind of pictures, you might remember that somebody told you there is another picture inside. So getting to the more easier one with the old lady and the duck. Show of hand. Enough. This is a more drastic picture, because on that you either see one or the other at first, and you have to get in about 70-80% of the time, you have to get help to say, hey, there is another picture. It's simply because this is not a simple figure ground determination, but this is the same object. You have the same foreground picture and the same background, but you have to interpret the picture in another way. You have to look at it from another side. So
And that's exactly the point, right? I mean, when you have a visualization, it's not clear how long you have to show it that the user gets the first impression and can tell me this, and doesn't look that long at the picture that he already starts thinking about it, right?
Well, the thinking starts at the moment that you're going to present context. As soon as you tell them, okay, we have figure ground determination test prepared for you today. Please look at the picture and tell me what you see. Then you have context and you have certain expectations that are going to be met or aren't. If you tell people just look at this screw and then you flash it and you unflash it, then you get the answer.
Thanks.
Can we do another test here? The Gestalt pictures. Can you get back to that slide?
Which one?
Gestalt.
Yes.
Did anybody else here see vertical lines there on B? Cool. Because when you said this is horizontal lines, maybe from this distance, because I do need better glasses though, from this distance we see vertical lines, maybe proximity to precedence?
Could be, very well, because they are closer together, yes.
And the size also, the whatever, is that a star symbol? Is smaller.
But if I would ask you which forms belong together,
sure, by all means,
you would see horizontal lines.
Yes.
But yeah, proximity, I've never thought about this before the presentation, but yes, because they are very close together.
Okay then, so
it could take precedence over one or the other. Interesting question.
Okay, so there's no further questions. So let's thank the speaker again. Okay, so and